things you can do for prevention against cancer. It's up to about 60%, I think the figures were, for preventing cancer if you exercise past a certain amount. Because you're literally growing your mitochondria in the body. You're enabling them to utilize oxygen to defend the cell whenever they need. They're strong, they're healthy. You're making your immune system healthy. So it really is. It's not rocket science.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Ultra Life Today. Ultra Life Today, Adam Payne is right here. My name is Kyle Drew, and we have been joined for a couple of different episodes with a new friend of ours, Mark Lintern. He is the author of The Cancer Resolution, and you can find his work on his website, cellsuppression.com. The reason it's called that is because his theory that he's been working on is called the Cell Suppression Theory of cancer. It comes up alongside some of the other theories that he's friendly with, like the metabolic theory, popularized by Dr. Thomas Seyfried. But it really works mostly in contrast with the idea of the somatic mutation theory, or the idea that, well, our DNA just breaks at random and we don't know why, and so we need to repair it that way. And it has been a riveting couple of conversations we've had, Adam. And so the place we wanted to go today, Mark, is where do we go from here? Now that we are saying, okay, we need to be looking at a pathogen, perhaps fungi, maybe others, but let's look at fungi and how does that affect the way that we should be thinking about cancer treatment? Give us a quick overview so that we can think through this a little bit together.
Okay, so I suppose the difference really between my theory and a number of others is this malfunction and suppression concept paradigm. Most of the theories view the fact that or assume that the cell has gone rogue, it's been damaged, and it's now the problem. It's now essentially a new species. It's growing out of control. It's doing whatever it wants. And that suggests that we've got to target, we've got to attack it with drugs, and we've got to kill it. Well, my concept is that actually the cell's being suppressed by an external influence, namely a fungal pathogen. There are bacteria involved in tumors, we know that, so they could have an influence. However, the suppression model suggests that actually our cells are doing everything they can to eliminate the threat of this external pathogen, and that it's now living intracellularly within the cells. And so our cells aren't at fault. So the paradigm now shifts from attacking the cell to supporting the body, supporting the defense mechanisms, the immune system, supporting the cell, supporting mitochondria. So you want to be doing all sorts of treatments associated with improving the holistic health of the body. Now, I think the issue is not to really rest on one particular theory. And the other thing I want to point out, when patients are coming into these sort of conversations and trying to understand what else they can do to help themselves, it's a minefield. It's overwhelming, and there's a lot of contradicting information out there. But I've not heard anyone really talk in the way that I'm about to speak about theories. And that is that you can use cancer theory as a practical tool to help you decide on what treatment approach to use, one that's going to be possibly the most effective. Because we don't know what the cause of cancer is yet. None of the theories that are out have been proven effectively. But what we do have is a set of theories that the accuracy of which can be measured against the hallmarks of cancer. Basically, the theory that explains more hallmarks is technically more accurate and is more likely to have identified a key mechanism of the disease. And what we find is that my theory on paper at the moment explains all 10 very cohesively and very coherently. The metabolic theory explains at least 7. There are 3 in contention that I suggest need to be fully explained. Proponents of the metabolic theory will suggest that they explain all 10, but there are these 3 contentions, so that's something for people to decide for themselves whether they think those contentions are significant or not. However, what we have here are 2 main theories that explain the vast majority of the hallmarks. Then you have the tissue organization field theory, which is pretty much dealing with the inflammation of the tissue, making sure that the tissue is working together effectively. So you've got to reduce inflammation, essentially. And that explains around 5 of the hallmarks. So that's good. So you want to take that into account. That makes sense anyway. Reduce the inflammation that gives rise to the disease in the first place. And then you have the cancer stem cell theory. And we know that stem cells play a major part in the regeneration of the tumor, unlimited growth, and chemotherapy resistance. So, that explains around 5 as well. But you have the somatic mutation theory kind of like at the bottom of the scale,
Yep.
which only explains 2. So as a patient looking at this, I would argue what you need to be doing is going, okay, well, let's have a look at these theories, which are the most accurate. And why don't I target the mechanisms of the theories which appear to be the most accurate at this moment in time? And really, it's for me, it's the cancer stem cell theory, it's the tissue organization field theory, it's the metabolic theory, and it's the cell suppression theory. So that's targeting the fungus, targeting the metabolism of the cell, as well as the cancer stem cells as best you can, and the terrain. Now, the beauty of this is that my theory and the metabolic theory and all the other theories, they overlap in what they're targeting. So
Right.
you have a lot of off-label drugs, say, that target the metabolism of the cell. We're trying to target all these different pathways that are alleged to be singularly driving the disease, and starving the cancer of glucose and sugar and possibly glutamine, right? Well, when you do this metabolic approach, a ketogenic diet and what have you, what you're actually doing as well is you're undertaking an antifungal approach, antimicrobial, antipathogen approach, because
Yep.
glucose is the fungal pathogen's primary fuel source. There are 1 or 2 pathogens that don't feed more on fat. However, it's been shown when you undertake a ketogenic diet, you actually reduce the fungal or pathogen burden within the body because you're reducing the availability of the glucose that causes inflammation and also feeds those pathogens. So a metabolic approach is also antifungal. And a number of the off-label drugs that are used, say metformin or statins, to target metabolic pathways in cancer, what I've found is that they're also antifungal too. A secondary effect is that they're antifungal. In fact, pretty much every drug that I'm seeing showing efficacy, some sort of efficacy against cancer, is antifungal. And then you've got the antifungal drugs themselves. So itraconazole and various other antifungal drugs have shown efficacy against a broad range of cancers in preclinical studies and in a number of case studies as well against live cancers. So, and the thing is with itraconazole, for instance, it also targets metabolic pathways. So here you have 2 major theories that are saying target the metabolic pathways. And I'm saying also you want to now consider the fungal pathogen because it might be the fungal pathogen properties of these drugs that is actually making them effective. Regardless, either way you choose either of these off-label drugs or fungal drugs, you're also targeting the metabolism of the cell as well. So you're hitting 2 birds with 1 stone effectively. Why would you not choose the extra additional fungal drugs or I wouldn't say fungal drugs necessarily, but natural means of targeting fungal pathogens as well? So
Agreed. And it begs a question, Mark. If you had the authority to do so, if you were given full freedom to write your own prescriptions and to choose your own diets and to take whatever you want without authority of the state or the medical establishment, etc., begin with prevention. This is not going to be medical advice. This is just 2 friends talking about what they do or what they would do. If you were set out to prevent that skin cancer from recurring or any other cancer, what would be some of your day-to-day approaches that regular people would also do? Not that you're telling anybody to do it, but what about you?
Yeah.
What might you do?
Yeah, so I'm not a clinician, so I can't give medical advice, and this is just for information only. Well, I mean, eat healthily, 1. Organic food. Reduce the amount of processed food, especially processed glucose in the body. I mean, obesity is one of the highest risks for developing cancer for a reason. Reduce anything that causes inflammation. You want to be living a life where you are eating fresh, locally grown, organic food as much as possible. Also meat. I'm not saying, because a lot of people say just choose a vegan diet and what have you. And yes, plants are very effective because they have phytonutrients in them, which can target pathogens. So we have that process that can aid the body eliminate pathogens or target them. But we do need to eat a balanced diet as well. meat is more bioavailable for some people. It depends on your microbiome. This is the thing. It's not a one size fits all for everybody. So you've got
Yeah.
to really understand that you've got to keep your microbiome healthy, reduce inflammation as much as possible, and exercise, because exercise is one of the greatest things you can do for prevention against cancer. It's up to about 60%, I think the figures were, for preventing cancer if you exercise past a certain amount. Because you're literally growing your mitochondria in the body. You're enabling them to utilize oxygen to defend the cell whenever they need. They're
Yep.
strong, they're healthy. You're making your immune system healthy. So it really is. It's not rocket science, but things get complicated in the day to day because we're so busy, and it's then so easy to pick up terrible food that is processed and is not doing us any good. You've got the wrong type of oils in there, which is causing inflammation throughout the body. And really, it's reducing inflammation, exercising, eating local, and just healthy, nutritious food.
You know, one of the things about the food piece of this, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. There was a study or a paper that came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2002 by Dr. Ruth Etzel, and it was talking about, at least in America, the American food supply and which foods, which crops are commonly contaminated with mycotoxins. And so she was talking about peanuts
Mm.
and wheat and many of the grains. And in the case of corn, she said it is universally contaminated with mycotoxins. And so some of us have
And peanut butter.
also peanuts and peanut
Mm.
butter and all of that, and cereals and toast and all of this. And some of us have taken that information and we've said, you know what? I'd like to kind of reduce my mycotoxin exposure by adjusting what I'm putting in my body, not just what's feeding fungus that's already there. Do you have an opinion about that kind of thing? We talked about mycotoxins a little bit in the previous episode, but reducing the amount of mycotoxins that we're actually ingesting by making certain choices based on the foods that we choose to ingest. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I think the problem is that there aren't that many tests that are being done for
Yeah.
identifying mycotoxins. There's only 5 or 6 or maybe even 10 that are commonly screened for. But there was a study done that was looking at the umbilical cord blood of newborn babies, right?
Yep.
And they found over 200 different toxins present in that blood. So the newborn baby, and I think it was over 180 were carcinogens as well as mycotoxins. So yes, unfortunately, peanut butter is absolutely gorgeous and very tasty. There was also a study done, I think it was in China, where they couldn't work out why a specific group of children were getting cancer at a high rate, and they found out that it was due to them eating peanut butter because the high rate of aflatoxin that is present
Goodness.
within the peanut butter. So
Wow.
yes, it is becoming aware of what grains and what products are actually high in mycotoxins. And the other thing I would like to point out as well is fasting.
Oh
It's not
boy,
just
yes.
exercise. If you want to look at it very simplistically, the body has 2 states, an anabolic state and a catabolic state. And when you're consuming primarily carbohydrates far too high, essentially you're upregulating insulin to such a level because the body wants to get rid of the carbohydrate or the glucose in the blood. You're upregulating insulin to a certain level, and that forces the body into an anabolic state, which means we're in a period of abundance. There's loads of food, so let's store that excess glucose as fat just for when winter comes around and we might need to, rely on less food. We can then burn it. And if you're over consuming, then you're going to be constantly in an anabolic state, right? Now, the benefit of the flip side of that is when you have a catabolic state, that's when you don't consume too many calories, and you don't consume too much glucose. Insulin drops below a certain threshold. The body starts realizing that we need to increase the amount of glucose. It breaks down that glucose from fat. That's the catabolic state. What's what happens when you get into ketosis.
Yep.
But what's happening there is, you imagine the 2 states. You have one which is in abundance, and if the analogy is you have an environment where a company or that grows and grows and grows, it's in a financial situation where there's financial abundance, everyone's spending money. you accrue employees that possibly aren't as efficient as they could be. This is the same as our cells. You have cells that are accrued and they might not be as efficient as they should be. So what happens is when you fast or when you lower that threshold and you turn into a catabolic state, the body goes, we're not eating enough food to survive necessarily, so we need to break down the food that we got, and it makes the body more efficient. Just like when there's not enough money in the economy, you start cutting back on all those jobs that were really unnecessary. The body does that. It's called autophagy and mitophagy, and you're breaking down the unnecessary cells of the body in order to make the body more efficient. So that needs to be a process of prevention as well. Understanding that you should be fasting however long, it's up to you, depends on your microbiome and your health, but that's a process that needs to be recognized that is as healthy.
What do you feel is the role of actual prescription antifungals? Again, you're not a clinician, you're not giving medical advice. But again, if you had a magic wand and you could choose for yourself, where do prescription antifungals and natural antifungals come into play in your mind?
I would go for natural antifungals as much as I could.
Yep.
But you might need that extra bit of help. Now, the problem with antifungals is that they're kind of outdated. We haven't developed many new ones recently, and they're very toxic to our cells. So they can't be used for prolonged periods of time. The other thing is that a lot of them are fungistatic, not fungicidal. So they don't kill the fungal pathogen. And this is where the issue comes in. A lot of people will say, oh, I've taken an antifungal drug, it hasn't worked, so therefore fungi must not be driving my cancer. Well, part of the problem is the immune system needs to finish it off. When you use itraconazole, we will inhibit the fungal pathogen, but the immune system needs to come in. And one of the major problems with the tumors is you have this switch to a Th2 phenotype or an M2 phenotype as well. And that's where the immune cells have switched to a phenotype where they're just interested in repairing the damage to cell tissue. They're not interested in attacking pathogens. You need a switch back to the Th1 response in order to do that. So if you are going to use, say, an antifungal drug, not even with an antifungal drug, you still need to switch the immune system back to a Th1 response, which is where you have immune phenotype that can target intracellular pathogens. And incidentally, fungi transition the immune system to a Th2 response in order to evade the immune system. That's just another correlation, So it's trying to address that and possibly using medicinal mushrooms. That's one of many different mistletoe, many different approaches that can be used to modulate the immune system to help the drug itself. If you go
What about the growing popularity of the antiparasite drugs? Fenbendazole, ivermectin, for example. At least those are the two in America that seem to be getting the most play.
Yeah, so they inhibit the microtubule formation in the cell, which effectively completely inhibits the entire process of absorbing nutrients into the cell over a period of time, which would block everything off. But I certainly feel there is an aspect of parasites that are involved in facilitating cancer progression as there are with bacteria. However, they're facilitating the process of fungal infection, which is the key driver for me. Those particular drugs are also antifungal for common fungal pathogens. So there's that link. They're inhibiting the metabolism of the cell, and they're also able to target the pathogens.
I love your perspective. Adam, do you have any thoughts before we bring this in for a landing? We've kept him for a little while.
What's fascinating to me about the fungal influence in tissues is that mostly fungus does not sit, it sits in the extracellular matrix in our bodies. It doesn't actually invade cells except in a very rare circumstances when it's actually harvesting or trying to infiltrate highly damaged or dead tissues. It actually is found intracellularly. And it's in the extracellular matrix that we see the hypha, which is kind of the feeding tubes of the tumor and of the fungus. And we see this in nature too. I mean, fungus, it causes burrows on trees. It farms and changes tissues that it invades. It's highly astute. There's a guy named Dr. Jehevitz he used to be University of Oklahoma, with the largest fungal lab in the country, actually harvesting fungus from the environment and looking how it grows and invades and changes the environment within which it grows. And he told me, he said, while I was sitting down just talking about fungus, he said, fungus has one fungus cell has so many different forms that it can take. It adapts, it changes, it morphs. in response to the environment, the kind of nutrients it's able to gain. If it feels like it's being attacked, it responds. It actually changes its chemical nature and creates a defensive posture, which is why we have fungus that creates biofilm. It's extremely, extremely hard to take fungus out of tissues. But there are things that I think that marry what we see with the metabolic approach to cancer, like what Mark, you're suggesting. Fasting, it reduces glucose, and we can actually not only weaken the cancer cells themselves that are stuck to aerobic glycolysis and are only able to make inefficient ATP with glucose, but also fungus is not only eating the lactic acid, but it's also eating glucose. So if we weaken its ability to use glucose and the byproducts, which it loves, lactic acid, etc. Boy, fungus is it's not just a participant in cancer. it's a very adaptable organism. There are things called epigenetic factors that fungus are very adept at producing that actually change and terraform the environment within which they exist. One of the things that Dr. Jehevitz was just rapt about was that fungus is an expert chemistry lab. It's an expert at producing chemicals that specifically change and adapt the environment around it. And so Mark, I think we're still at the early edge of understanding how fungus is terraforming its environment. It's not a passive participant in the cancer expression experience. It's an active instigator. The things that we're talking about, like antifungals, we're still learning. And in fact, if you talk to a doctor and say, hey, how about prescribing an antifungal in the context of my cancer, they'll tell you that you're absolutely insane. Antifungal drugs are toxic to the human body. Why would I prescribe a very toxic compound to somebody that's dealing with cancer? We need to treat the cancer, right? And so that's why antifungals have not been used extensively, I think, in the context of cancer until now. We need to take a very systematic approach to understanding. Now that we understand this approach, what are the therapeutic implications for helping somebody overcome this awful disease? Mark, any final thoughts on this? Now that we've discovered this theory, and I don't call it a theory anymore. I think this is really the underlying paradigm of what's really going on in cancer. Your approach marries not just a number of things that we're seeing coming in these papers, not just the Narunsky 2022 Cell paper, but also many other papers that are showing that the fungal biome or the fungal bacterial biome is present. But it really answers the overall overarching paradigm, and it's compatible with the Otto Warburg metabolic approach to cancer. The folks out there that are the Naisha Winters that are using the metabolic approach to cancer, they're seeing results because I think doing a metabolic approach actually resolves most of the fungal issues, but not all.
Well, Dr. Winters wrote the foreword, did she not? Or the introduction to your book, Mark?
Now, she knows this is all part of the whole thing. Mark, where do you think that this leaves us? Leave us with some nuggets here.
In terms of the future?
Yeah, the future, yeah.
Well, I think it's exciting. It's exciting in the sense that, it's providing us with additional options, especially for patients. It's going to provide them with hope. It aligns with the other theories that are out there. And it provides us with options in terms of where we go in testing the theory and developing new treatments. Hopefully treatments that can target both the metabolism and fungal pathogens in different ways, but also diagnostics, because we might be able to learn or identify certain cancers based on the microbiome, or the tumor microbiome, or whatever metabolites are being produced within the tissue. Nagalase, like I mentioned earlier, is one that increases with the volume of the tumor, essentially, and it's only produced within the tumor itself. So I think it is very exciting, but we just need to. It's getting people to come on board that is the issue, I think, because it's so novel. It just the cell suppression side of things is novel because everyone's kind of locked in this idea that the cell's the enemy. When I'm saying it's not, we've got to work with the cell because it's just hijacked by a particular pathogen.
Hijacked, that's a good one.
And the other thing is, the pathogen's intracellular, and it's in there and it's absorbing all the nutrients that are being absorbed into the cell. It's sequestering the nucleotides in the cell in order to, create more of itself, essentially. So the cell, because it's now the cell death mechanism is blocked, the cell is acting on autopilot effectively, and it's trying to always come back to homeostasis. So if you've got depleted purines and pyrimidines in the cell, or glucose or arginine or glutamine, the cell is now wanting to absorb these nutrients, primarily glucose and glutamine, in order to then create the nutrients to replenish those nutrients being absorbed by the pathogen. So it's for the benefit of the pathogen to stay intracellular and survive within that environment. So it kind of explains a lot of these other things, and we can target all these different mechanisms, but fundamentally it suggests that we do really need to focus on what fungal pathogens are present in the patient, possibly in their tumor, and then we have a more directed way in which we can target them.
Well, guys, the discovery of fungus in tumors doesn't replace genetics or metabolism. It really completes the picture for us. Cancer begins to look less like a random failure and more like a managed biological environment. As metabolic theory, immune suppression, and the fungal biome converge, a more complete understanding of cancer emerges. This conversation, I think, marks the beginning of that shift. Mark, thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate all our listeners joining us today. Kyle, thank you for being with me today.
I've loved it.
This has been a real treat. Thank you for joining us here at Ultralife today. Please join the conversation online with us. Reach out to Mark Lintern at the Cancer Resolution at cellsuppression.com. Mark, thank you for joining us. This has been a real treat.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Adam. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you guys, and I look forward to hopefully talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, we'll see you at Annie Appleseed.
Oh, yes, you will. Yeah, fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, take care. Thanks, everybody. Ultralife today.